Hello and welcome to my channel. My name is Martine, and if you are new here, I do videos on Vedic astrology mainly, but also with some tropical insights, and I focus on both relationship and natal astrology. And if you like this video and you would like to see more content from me, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to my channel. Also consider clicking the notifications bell if you want to see when I will post a new video. Also, if you are interested in a private reading, I do readings in astrology on a variety of topics ranging from relationship readings to career to transits for 2-3 years, or solar return charts or predictions for 1 year, etc. You are free to email me at the email address that I will leave in the video description, and I can send you a pricing list and reading options and any other details that you might require. Also, I want to mention that I have started membership options on this channel, and the short of it, just to give you the short perks that you will get if you choose to join the membership section, you will get 1 extra video per month for each membership stage or tier. So for the first tier, you will get 1 extra video per month. For the second tier, you will get 2 extra videos per month, so you will have access to level 1 and level 2 videos. And for level 3 or third tier, you will get 3 extra videos per month. The level 1 and level 3 videos are going to be on a variety of topics, so basically anything related to astrology, but it will be content that is not shown on my regular usual videos, right? So this is members only exclusive content, and it can range from, tips and tricks on how to read a horoscope to, I haven't done this yet, but I plan on doing maybe members only astrological synastry for famous couples, for instance, or the analysis of famous people's horoscopes, but then I can also get into divisional charts, etc., etc. So all kinds of things. The level 1 or second tier of membership options is especially related to synastry astrology topics, meaning relationship-oriented astrology. So this could be things like how to discover which kind of partner archetype is right for you according to your horoscope, or it could be, again, different characteristics, whether you're going to have a good marriage according to your horoscope or a less than stellar marriage. But you can find more concrete examples in the lists that you will find in the video description, because I have added the playlists where you can already see all the videos that I have posted in each members section. So yeah, you can see what videos you will have access to from the ones that I have already done. But I will continue to post, like I said, 1 extra video per month for each level of membership. And in addition to that, in the members only section, you will have access to members only polls, and you will also have priority when it comes to getting your comments replied to on my channel. And you will also have stickers that basically show up next to your username that show that you are a member, and a couple of exclusive emojis. All right, so that's pretty much all the perks that you can have as a member on my channel. If you're curious, you can check the video description for more details as well, or you can click the join button under any of my videos to also see the prices, because the prices will be shown in your local currency. All right, in addition to the members only section, I also have a tarot channel, and I post there semi-regularly, and I will be linking the tarot channel in the video description as well as in the pinned comment. It's called Martine's Tarot. So if you are curious about tarot, if you're into it, maybe check out my channel, maybe subscribe. I would greatly appreciate it. Thank you very much for listening to this intro. And now I'm going to get straight into today's topic. And welcome to my channel. Welcome to another video from me. Today's topic is going to be a continuation of a previous video that I posted probably about a month ago about the first house lord through houses. And in that video, I focused on the positive aspects or the potentially positive outcomes of the first house lord going through different houses. And I said that I was going to make a part 2 about this where I was going to focus on the potentially negative outcomes. So that is this video, today's video. So I'm basically going to focus on what could go wrong, with the first house lord going through each different house. So, with the first house lord going through the first house, even though this is a really positive aspect, definitely conducive to a strong sense of self and generally good health as well. If this is a negative placement, if let's say the lord of the first house is a malefic and or it is debilitated, it's a very debilitated or afflicted planet, you could be seeing some negative impact. And the negative impact would be that you are basically afraid to show yourself in public situations or to assert yourself in any way, worst case scenario. So there might be situations where either, again, depending on the planet in question and what is going on in the individual horoscope, but you could be seeing situations where either you're overly confident, even to the point of becoming aggressive, assertive, or you could be too shy to the point where you don't know how or when to assert yourself. So there might be an issue of not being perceived in a positive light sometimes with this placement, mostly because, again, you either are too shy or come on too aggressively. But both of these situations probably will be disproportionate with the circumstances. So, in other words, badly timed each time. So, either the situation will call for diplomacy and you will tend to be too aggressive, or the other way around, basically. Another potential negative impact of this placement is that you may have not had a great early environment. Something about your environment, especially the geographical location. So I'm not so much talking about the actual physical home here. I'm talking about the geographical, like the city, the country that you are living in. Something may have not been positive for you. So one example that I can think about is, I don't know, you may have been a victim of bullying early on, or for some reason, maybe you just felt like you did not quite belong and somehow, felt like this affected your sense of confidence later on in life. Another thing is, of course, the first house is the house of the physical body and the vitality and the health to a large extent. So if there is malefic influence here, if the lord of the first house is not particularly positive, there could be health issues. Yeah. So it would be hard to say exactly what kind of health issues, although the first house does primarily have to deal with the head. So, use your imagination. Could be any kind of affliction connected to anything on your head, But again, a lot will depend on what else is going on, or if there are other house lords influencing this placement, then you might have other health issues. Another thing that could be going on with the first house lord in the first house, which, kind of derives from all the other things that I've mentioned, is you could be having a sense of confusion, about who you are. So there could be maybe trouble with defining yourself, not having a strong sense of identity, which, by the way, is very common in situations where there is abuse or ostracization, especially early on in life. So I'm not trying to say that this placement, again, is going to be especially abusive. There are worse ones to have, even when, the first house lord is negative. But it is one thing that could happen. Okay, aside from that, when the first house lord is going to go into the second house, since the second house is the house of family of origin, it's the house of diet, or anything to do with the mouth and throat, actually, including the voice. It's also about your savings, your, let's say, your confidence in your ability to save money for a rainy day. And it's also, oh, I think I mentioned diet, yeah. So I think I covered just about the main ideas. Self-esteem, diet, attitude towards diet, and family of origin, most important. Okay. Also, your relationship towards finances. This is why the second house corresponds to Taurus, which is naturally connected to Venus. And so, if the Lord of the first house is negative in this case, you could be seeing situations where, of course, the family of origin is not great. Your relationship to the family of origin is not great. You could be having abusive parents. Even if they're not abusive, you could have those situations of, the road to hell is paved with good intentions, in the sense that they may try to help you. They might think that they're doing what is best for you, but really they're not really supporting your path in life. There are many parents like that in the world. They think they're doing everything that is right and best for their kids, but they're actually suppressing the child's natural talents and instead, trying to turn them into something they're not, just to give you an example. Aside from that, there could be an issue with your relationship to money, your ability to save, of course, depending on the situation, especially if you have some Saturn influence on the second house. You could be looking at early poverty experiences, a kind of a fear of not having enough material possessions. So that could be a thing. Aside from that, with the actual physical aspect, the mouth, the voice, so there could be complexes about your voice. There could be maybe even something like a speech impediment going on with this. And also there could be actual health issues, connected to speaking, to the voice, to the throat. So that could be a thing if it's afflicted. Okay, aside from that, moving on to the first house lord falling into the third house. If this is a negative placement, third house has to deal with younger siblings, neighbors, short-term or short-distance travel. It has to deal with your thoughts, your thought processes, and of course your actual mental health by, extension. It has to deal with your mental health. And also it's, oh yeah, I think I've covered it. Oh, well, medically, yeah, it also has to deal with the hands, the arms, the chest, to some extent the respiratory system. Also, to some extent, it has to deal with the nervous system, because again, it's connected to the mind, everything that has to deal with thinking. So if there is affliction here with the Lord of the first house going into the third, and also, oh, last but not least, on a spiritual plane, third house is about courage. Yeah, that's your ability to push forward to achieve whatever it is that you want. So if this is a negative placement, you could be having a lack of confidence with this. You could be afraid of going after what you want for whatever reason. Of course, a lot has to be looked at from the perspective of the entire horoscope. There could be a lot of other insights in there as to what exactly might be causing this. But a lot of the times, as usual, it does stem in early childhood experiences. Since the first house is the house of the physical body, this could actually have to deal with something like, something physical, like a physical ailment that you may have suffered from, or, some kind of insecurity about your appearance, the way you are perceived, something about your personality not being seen as acceptable by others, that may have caused some kind of a complex when it comes to your ability to go after what you want. Aside from that, again, if you look at it from a medical perspective, it could be showing issues with any of those areas of the body that I mentioned previously, so the respiratory system, the arms, the hands, the shoulders, there could be, some kind of issues going on there. Also, relationship with the younger sibling. So the relationship with the younger sibling could be particularly tense. Again, it may have even gotten physical, especially early on in life, or at some point in life might get physical because of the connotations of the first and the third houses. Both of them are quite, well, physical, let me put it like that. But you would also have to look at, the planetary influences, like what planet is actually ruling the first house and the third house, and, what other planets are influencing this whole configuration. But there might be some bad relationship towards younger siblings. Also, issues with neighbors, because again, third house is neighbors. Yeah. Aside from that, again, because third house is physical, sorry, not physical, but it's mental health. It's your thought processes, the even neurology to some extent. Again, there might be issues connected to this as well, like some kind of mental health issues, especially the types that are brought on by faulty judgment, so to speak. But, as usual with all types of mental illnesses, I think they all stem from, early childhood experiences, so I won't get into that. But, yeah, there could be some kind of faulty thought patterns happening here with this placement, especially if there's a lot of negative impact, like negative self-talk, negative self-belief, negative self-soothing rituals, that get you stuck in a rut. Okay, now I had to take a break and I kind of lost my train of thought. Where was I? Yeah, I think I was talking about the Lord of the first house going in the third house. Issues with siblings, potentially, like I said, issues with communication, potential issues with neighbors, yeah, especially early on in life, like early on in your childhood, there may have been some issues with the neighbors, with the neighborhood that negatively impacted your development, so to speak. Yeah, I think I've pretty much covered everything with the first lord in the third house. Moving on to the first lord in the fourth house. So, what happens when this is a negative lord, or, afflicted or malefic, or, yeah, there's a lot of negative energy here. So, fourth house is about the relationship with the mother. It's about early education up until, let's say, high school graduation. It's also connected to the culture that you come from, the history that you come from, the history of your lineage, especially from the mother's side, but refers to, early childhood home as well. Also, the actual country you come from, you know. So these are some main things. Of course, aside from that, it also connects to the actual home environment that you grew up in, as in the physical home and everyone who was in it. And it connects to vehicles as well. So if the Lord of the first house is going into the fourth house and it's afflicted or negative, there might be issues to connected to any of these areas. Medically, again, the fourth house shows the chest area, the stomach area, including, well, the chest, including the breasts, by the way. Also, to some extent, the respiratory system, but it connects to the cardiovascular system to some extent as well. Although, in my experience, it's not as strongly connected to the cardiovascular system as the fifth house, which is the house of the sun. It's more about adjacent issues, like, issues by proxy, like high blood pressure, for instance, would fall into the fourth house affliction. But, I digress. So, what would happen negatively if this is a negative situation is you could have a bad experience in your early educational, you know, development. So, either things like you were not able to keep up or progress, maybe your grades weren't great, you were not able to focus on your education. It could also show, of course, peer pressure, potential bullying, just not having a pleasant early environment when it comes to your education, or some kind of an interruption going on in the education. Of course, a lot more details can be seen from the individual horoscopes because there are a lot of things to be looked at with respect to nuances and stuff. So, for instance, if you have some Rahu going on, I would definitely say potential disruptions here with the education. If you have Saturn, it could be like illness, is keeping you from focusing on your education. So, yeah, there might be different different scenarios, but the general idea is that somehow the educational experience was not great in the early life, like I said, up until high school graduation. Aside from that, there could be something to do with the homeland. You know, like maybe you always felt like you didn't quite fit in. There could also, worst case scenario, there could have been, clashes of culture, maybe between your culture and the culture of the country that you grew up in. Okay, because homeland does not just refer to like, your like family lineage as in your ethnicity and bloodline. It's literally the country that you grew up in. So if you are coming from a different culture, for instance, this could have shown experiences of discrimination, for instance, or just feeling like you did not really fully belong. That's one aspect. Aside from that, there could be issues with vehicles, and this could be, throughout life. Again, depending on what malefics are actually influencing the fourth house, there could be all kinds of scenarios here. So, like, if Mars is prominent here, I would pay attention to, driving and all that stuff, because there is a higher than average risk of accidents with this placement, but will not dwell. Also, same thing if 8th house lord is involved here. Aside from that, of course, it could show health issues connected to the 4th house related issues like the breast, the chest, to some extent the cardiovascular issues, cardiovascular system, and also the stomach, the digestive system. Aside from that, with the home, there could be, like, with the actual physical home, there could be a lot of nuisances. And again, I'm talking a lot about early childhood experiences because these are the ones that shape your personality throughout your life to a large extent. But that doesn't mean that it's just going to affect your early childhood and it's no longer going to be active later on. Of course, it could affect you throughout your life. So if you have a malefic ruling the first house, or aspected by a malefic, the lord of the first house is aspected by a malefic, you want to look for the dashas and the antardashas of that planet, because during that time you might be having some issues connected to fourth house matters. So, for instance, something could be breaking down in the home during this time because the fourth house is the home base. Or your car could be breaking down during that time. Something might be happening. But again, if you want to get more detailed issues, you would have to look at each individual horoscope to see all the nuances. Aside from that, the relationship with the mother, of course. So the relationship with the mother could be strained. It could have potentially negatively impacted your development, your sense of identity. So normally, if this is a positive configuration, it means that the mother really nurtured you and built you up and supported your life path. If this is a negative situation, you could have a mother who really hindered your development, even sometimes with the best of intentions. Like somehow she just didn't really teach you how to make the most of yourself or to develop in a way, like I said, that really brings out your natural self and your natural strengths. Okay? Aside from that, moving on to the first house lord going into the fifth house. If this is a negative configuration, of course, the fifth house has to deal with a lot of things, including creativity, education, especially education from high school level to master's degree. Somewhere, ending somewhere around the master's degree. According to some astrologers, I've heard them say that master's degree is already ninth house. Some of them say it's fifth house. So I tend to stick to fifth house covers the master's degree level, and ninth house is more like PhD and, specialized courses. And also the fifth house has to deal with creativity. It has to deal with children, relationship to children, also your fertility, to some extent the ability to have children. Also romance and romantic partners, but it refers to, so it doesn't show like marriage partners. It shows romance and romantic partners. So like the pre-marriage phase, so to speak. So the courtship phase. It also shows, like, what's the word? I keep thinking investments. Yeah, it shows like speculative gains. That's the term. So things like stock market stuff, you know, investments, and actually any kind of financial investments, but the ones that tend to be riskier. So as opposed to having fixed assets and things like that. So, if the first house lord is negative, it means that you might have troubles with multiple of these areas, especially during the time when either the first house lord or the fifth house is activated through dasha or antardasha or some other planet that is involved in this configuration. So, for instance, if you have, let's say, first house lord is Mars and it's going into the fifth house and it's conjunct Venus. That's actually not the worst placement, but bear with me for the sake of the example here. Let's say it's conjunct Venus. When you're going through the Venus Antardasha or Dasha, this would be the time when potentially negative impacts of the fifth house will be activated in your life. And this could look like, for instance, issues with losing money through speculative gains. Of course, the fifth house, when you're looking at it from the psychological perspective as well, has to deal with how you are seen as an authentic individual. So, fifth house is very much connected to creative expression, authenticity. That's why it's very much connected to drama more than any of the other houses. It's very much connected to the dramatic arts because it's all about being center stage and playing and enjoying life and all that stuff. So if the fifth house is negatively impacted, when it comes to the psychological aspect, this could show that you had parents or an early life environment that did not really celebrate you for who you were. So you could grow up feeling like you shouldn't be yourself. Could, you know, again, depending on what planets are actually involved, there could be various expressions of this, but generally these are the general vibes. Somehow you felt like you couldn't really be yourself. If there's a lot of Mars involved here, that could show a lot of anger towards, you know, your early life environment and how you were raised because you feel like you're not allowed to be yourself. If there's a lot of Saturn here, it could show a lot of repression. It could show an inability to be creative or to let go and enjoy yourself or to live in the moment because you are always, you know, stifled, and you probably have a lot of negative self-talk and a lot of negative thinking patterns that stem in early development. Aside from it, so like I said, also with the fourth and the other houses, really, it's not just about the psychology and your early life environment because these placements will affect you throughout your life and they get activated, like I said, especially during dashas, antardashas, and planetary transits as well. So if you have a planet transiting, let's say, the first or the fifth houses and activating this configuration, then it will come to the forefront. Issues pertaining to these houses will come to the forefront. And again, issues that you might see aside from feeling stifled and not being allowed to be yourself, you could also see issues connected to children. So potentially, again, I don't want to, you know, this is kind of a sensitive topic, so I have to be careful not to be too negative, even though generally I don't hold back when it comes to interpretations because it is what it is, you know. But with fertility, I have to mention this as a disclaimer. Whoops. Sorry about that. I have to mention this as a disclaimer that when it comes to fertility, there are multiple things to look at. So this would only be one aspect in many. Still, though, if there is negative impact here, you know, affliction of the first house, especially since the first house is the physical body, there could be an issue with fertility. So there could be an issue with the ability to conceive a child, either conceiving or giving birth if you're a woman. You know, there could be some issues there, especially usually with the birth issues, you would see something like Mars there, especially because... Actually, I'm not going to get into details. I'm just going to drop it there. But yeah, there could be when it's an affliction, you know, when it's not a healthy first house lord, this could show, like I said, some kind of fertility issues. And or it could also show some kind of a karmic connection to the children. Like the children somehow could be really challenging. And when it comes to the actual physical health, irrespective of the topic of fertility, the fifth house also rules the cardiovascular system, the heart. So there might be issues connected to the heart, especially when you see a lot of Saturn involved in this configuration. There might be health issues. And aside from that, the fifth house also shows your hobbies, your interests. So, well, it kind of goes hand in hand with that inauthenticity trend that I mentioned, but there could be some kind of element of shame or an element of, even when you don't feel shame, just that your hobbies, your creative expression is not positively received by the rest of the world. But a lot of the times, again, this would have to be looked at from a psychological perspective, because if there are issues connected to these topics, especially on the topic of authenticity, creativity, and all that, basically anything to do with psychology, you would have to analyze the early childhood environment, really. And yeah, these are some issues that you could see really with the, another thing that I can mention, but again, this is more specific. Well, two more things. One of them more specific than the other. One thing is that the educational system, yeah, I don't know if I've mentioned this, maybe I've lost my train of thought again, but I don't know if I mentioned this. So you could have issues with education, maybe interruptions in education for some reason. Maybe you cannot complete your education because maybe even due to health issues, because the first house is about the physical body. And a lot would have to be seen from individual placements, again, because it depends on what planets are actually involved and what else is going on there. But yeah, so there could be interruptions in education, and I'm talking about college level and or master's degree with the fifth house. And the more specific thing that I wanted to mention is for those of you who are, let's say, interested in politics. If this is a malefic placement, you could be perceived in a very negative light. But even in this situation, again, you still have to look at it from the full picture. But this would be one of those aspects that kind of leads towards, not doing so great in politics. This is pretty much what I could say about the fifth house. Now, when the first house lord is going into the sixth house, sixth house is the house of health. It's the house of enemies, competition. It's the house of pets. It's also the house of daily activities, daily routines. That's why it's also often connected to employment. As opposed to being self-employed, it's particularly referring to jobs and people who have jobs. If the first house lord is not particularly healthy and not the best shape here, and it's falling into the sixth house, this could show that you will have a lot of enemy relations throughout your life. So, strong enemies that might be coming against you. There might be situations where you have to deal not just with enemies, but also with a lot of competition, a lot of arguments, a lot of fighting. You might often find yourself in situations of conflict. And sometimes it may seem like it's not even your fault. Sometimes, of course, this is where I have to say it will depend on the individual chart, because you can tell more details from what else is going on surrounding this configuration. But it could be all kinds of things. It could be whether it's your, behavioral problem that will oftentimes show in the horoscope, or sometimes it's because of some kind of a karmic issue, like you have to pay some kind of a debt, and you might run into a lot of naysayers and a lot of people who just try to impede your progress. And also when it comes to competitions, you might have some painful losses in competitions when this is not a healthy first house lord. And you may not, you could be a sore loser sort of person. So someone who really cannot handle defeat, or maybe even criticism. You might be super sensitive. And again, with respect to why this is, you would have to look in more personal details in the individual horoscope. But these could be the general outcomes, okay? So you could be the kind of person that shies from competitions, for instance, because you just want to avoid criticisms altogether. Another thing, of course, since the sixth house has to deal with the health system, especially with, the sixth house also especially has to deal with the intestines, like the lower digestive tract. So there could be health issues connected to this. If there's Saturn involved in here, there could be chronic health issues connected to this. And not just if Saturn is involved, there might be, issues on and off with this. But generally with Saturn, there might be some long-lasting issues connected to this. Aside from that, there might be issues with pets. You might be going through unhappy situations surrounding pets. Again, you can use your imagination. There could be a number of things that could go wrong when it comes to pets, like losing pets in a very traumatic way, or having bad luck when it comes to pets. You could be having pets that you just don't get along with. They're aggressive, hard to tame. Pets that might get sick, that's another thing, right? So that could happen. Then there's the employment situation. So if this is not a healthy first house, you could be coming across negative situations at the workplace, things that are impacting you I was going to say unnecessarily, but that are impacting you negatively, that are leaving a strong negative mark on you, and again might even affect your health to some extent. And your routines, this could also show that maybe either because it was from lack of discipline in early life, or just maybe your natural tendency, but you may not have the healthiest day-to-day routines. Again, with respect to what this means, you could use your imagination. It could be using substances to get by. It could be very irregular sleep patterns. It could be poor diet, all kinds of things, right? But somehow it could be that your day-to-day routines are negatively impacting your, speaking of health, like that was one of my bones cracking. There could be something, negatively impacting your health, basically. By the same token, it could go the other way around as well. So somehow it could be that your physical body, either your appearance or your actual, again, it could be your actual health, your vitality, or the way that people perceive your physical body, that negatively impacts your ability to get a job, or your ability to get the kind of job that you want. There could be all kinds of scenarios, to be fair. Aside from that, okay, so moving on to first house lord going into the seventh house. So the first house lord going into the seventh house, if this is negative, okay, the seventh house lord has to deal with the spouse archetype. Partnerships in general, but especially the spouse archetype. Aside from that, it's actually also the house that signifies sexuality and to some extent death, but I won't get into that. But yeah, it's connected to sexuality as well. It's connected to anything that involves negotiation, diplomacy, use of diplomacy, and also working with people in partnerships or in one-to-one basis. So when this is negative and it's falling in the seventh house, this could show that the relationship with the spouse may not be great. In what way? Again, you would have to look at individual horoscopes to get more information about this, but just to give you some examples, this could be maybe your spouse will have health issues. Maybe your spouse will tend to be sexually incompatible with you, so you're not going to be happy in the bedroom, in the relationship. All kinds of scenarios, all right? So there might be some kind of fundamental incompatibility, for instance, happening. At the very least, I would say there might just be small nuisances, like annoyances with one another, lack of patience, and stepping on each other's toes, which to some extent, yeah, I know you could say, well, that happens in every relationship, but with these placements, if they're negative, they're going to happen more than regular, let me put it like that. And aside from that, with the seventh house, there could be a complex either because, again, your early life experiences or something happening throughout your life on a psychological level, you could not be perceived well by audiences. And if that is the case, so like for instance, if you can think of a situation where you had to talk in front of a crowd and you went through some kind of, let's say, bad situation, humiliating situation, or maybe you just lose yourself in front of a crowd, right? So this could be stemming in some kind of early childhood experiences, that in some kind of early childhood experience, and it's worth looking into. But there could be something to do with either, yeah, crowds not perceiving you positively, or crowds having a negative impact on you, or you having a negative impact on them. I can think of someone who has this placement, and that was Adolf Hitler, actually. I'm pretty sure. Actually, I would have to double check that. Okay, I just checked, and yes, to some extent, Hitler falls in this category because he had ascendant in Libra, and his Venus was in the seventh house with the Sun and with Mars. So very, very narrow Mars-Venus conjunction. But anyway, I'm not here to talk about Hitler. Just giving an example, you could be someone who has either, like I said, a negative impact on crowds, or crowds can have a negative impact on you. But again, a lot of this, for instance, if you have to do a public speech and you would like to see how it's going to go, I would advise you to look into the dashas and antardashas and see if there are some planets involved in this configuration that are being activated at the time, which would make this conjunction come to life and potentially impact you negatively if this is a negative situation. Aside from that, falling into the seventh house, this also has to deal with foreign travel, even foreign settlement. The Lord of the first going into the seventh. So if this is negative, there could be all kinds of complications. For instance, if you want to move abroad, there could be complications, there could be frustrations, or even if or and when you move abroad, there could be negative impacts, like a negative outcome, bad experiences, frustrations. Now, I'm not trying to say, of course, this is not some kind of a deal breaker sort of aspect, because I always mention this, like I said, everything has to be looked at from the general horoscope. But these are some things that you could experience, all right, if this is a negative situation. Same thing, because seventh house is the house of partnerships. You could be having negative experiences with business partners. So if this is a very negative situation, it's probably advisable that you don't get into any kind of a business partnership. But yeah, even if the rest of your horoscope is really suggesting it, I would really think twice, or I would be very careful about who I get into a partnership with. Another thing is legal issues, because seventh house is about mediation, negotiation, so to some extent it's also connected to the legal system. So there could be unpleasant situations connected to that as well. If the first house lord is going to the eighth house and it's not a positive situation, this classical, like literally the first thing that I can think about is that this is the classical aspect that would advise you not to get plastic surgery. If you're considering plastic surgery, or any kind of body modification, even just cosmetic procedures, be very, very careful with these. It's best to be conservative and not go for anything drastic, dramatic, and life-changing, because things could go wrong with this placement, especially since the first house lord is literally the lord of the physical body, and it's going into the house of transformation. If this is a negative placement, it could have disastrous consequences. Like these people who have had plastic surgery, even among famous people, and nobody could recognize them afterwards, and it actually ended up just doing more damage than anything positive. This could be a scenario. Now, this is just one aspect. Another thing is with the eighth house, it rules the in-laws. So relationship with the in-laws could be not great. It could again impact your health, your sense of confidence, your self-esteem, all of the things that the first house is ruling. Aside from that, this can show normally, see, the Lord of the first house into the eighth can show that you are meant to move abroad, especially to a country where there's a foreign language being spoken. But if this is a very negative placement, there could be frustrations, there could be delays with respect to moving abroad, or there could be some nasty experiences happening there once you get there. Aside from that, eighth house is about loans. So again, be very careful when you borrow money. Be very careful when you borrow and lend money, because if you lend money and this is a negative situation, you may never see it back. If you are borrowing money, be careful that you read the fine print, and you don't find yourself paying like 4 times as much in interest later on. Also be careful not just when it comes to loaning or lending, but be careful with any kind of operation that has to deal with using other people's money. So that includes banking, insurance, pensions. Whenever you draft these contracts or you sign anything, you have to be super careful, think things through like 1,000 times, maybe look for second opinions, third opinions, and all that. Make sure that you are as thorough as possible. Don't just be like, well, my sister's on this plan, so I'm going to go on the same one. No. You have to look into it in depth with these placements because you never know what could go wrong. And another thing, though, with the negative placement of this, I have to say, 8th house is one of those rough houses, all right? It's a Dustana house, just like the 6th and the 12th houses. So generally with the first house lord in the 8th, this is going to show not an easy life path. This is showing, especially when it's a negative situation, a lot of ups and downs, a lot of situations where you feel like the rug is being pulled from underneath your feet, and maybe even sometimes rags to riches or riches to rags scenarios could happen, especially if the second house is also involved in this, or the 11th house is also involved in this, because these are, the money houses to a large extent. That could be an outcome, and there's also a tendency, a bit of a tendency to be accident prone here with this placement. So be really careful, don't take unnecessary risks, because again, since the first house lord is ruling the physical body, you could be seeing situations where, you end up with scars, or worse, you don't want to end up with broken limbs and stuff. Again, I'm not saying you should spend the rest of your life inside the home, but you should be careful, especially when you're going through the dashas or antardashas, when these planets involved in the configuration are being activated. Okay, moving on to first house lord going into the 9th house. So what does it mean when the first house lord is going into the 9th house? 9th house is connected to the father figure, mentors, gurus, religious leaders to some extent as well, teachers, anyone who's like a teacher, professor, anyone who's kind of like a guide in your life is signified by the 9th house. It also shows higher education after master's degree, so PhD and specialized courses, stuff like that. It also shows publishing, writing, publishing, higher philosophy, religion, everything that has to deal with the so-called quote-unquote higher mind is shown by the 9th house. So when the first house lord is not particularly healthy, it's more negative, afflicted, falling into the 9th house, obviously the first thing that you could think about is that the relationship with the father was not great, in the sense that the father figure may have taught you things that actually moved you away from your natural progress in life, from your, let's say, righteous path in life, as shown by the first house. So you could have for instance, I can give you an example, like people who grow up in the mafia, for instance, and their fathers are teaching them to become murderers from the time that they're children. That would be an example. I haven't actually studied any charts like this. If you know, if you know of any charts of gang bangers, sorry, please let me know in the comment section or drop me an email because I'm really curious. But I wouldn't be surprised if you would see this configuration, because this is the kind of placement where you would see a father figure that teaches the child things that are not really in their best interest. And of course, the relationship with the father in general could be tense. Relationship with gurus can be tense, but especially when you look at it from the perspective of your general life path's progression, and also from the perspective of your sense of confidence, sometimes even from the perspective of your physical health, right? So worst case scenario could be some physical abuse happening in a household. Again, a lot would have to be seen from individual configurations and what planets are actually involved in here. So if I would see Mars involved in here, I would tend to draw the conclusion that there may have been some violent outbursts here at the very least in the person's early childhood, or even physical violence, because Mars is like that. If there's Saturn, it could show some kind of illness, maybe even illness born of neglect from the parent, especially from the father figure. So yeah, there could be a multitude of outcomes. The ninth house, of course, also being connected to education. This could show, like, for instance, you will go for a degree that is not really useful to you, or you might get into debt because you need to get a degree or because you want to get a degree. It could show not being particularly successful in academia for whatever reason. And publishing, the same thing. There could be frustrations when it comes to publishing. There could be obstacles. There could be, not saying that, again, it's not going to happen or anything, but you should be prepared that there might be obstacles with these placements. Same thing when it comes to traveling abroad, because the ninth house is also about traveling abroad, dealing with foreign cultures. There might be obstacles, there might be unpleasant situations, again, depending on what is actually going on. So let me give an example. If, let's say someone has the Lord of the first house conjunct the Lord of the sixth house going into the ninth house, I would be thinking this person might have some kind of physical accident or some kind of physical pain when they are traveling abroad for a competition. One of many possibilities. Right, so it depends. That's what I'm trying to say, that it does depend a lot on what else is going on in the horoscope and what other configurations, Aside from that, the ninth house, so the Lord of the first not being particularly positive could just show that, again, the father was either abusive or absent, depending on this. Again, if the Lord of the first house is conjunct K2 in the ninth house, I would say, most likely this person did not have an involved, hands-on sort of father figure, right? Most likely they had a absent father figure, even if the father was physically there, didn't really care much about the child, was not really actively involved in the child's life. But yeah, etc., etc. Could be all kinds of scenarios. So yeah. Another thing, when you think about gurus, teachers, and stuff like that, you could be led astray by gurus or teachers, like people who ended up following Charles Manson, for instance, worst case scenario. Or, I'm not going to name names because I'm going to get some real hate in the comment section maybe, but if you ask me, a lot of the so-called gurus that are out there today are fake AF, but they have loads of followers, people eating out of the palm of their hands. So people who are honestly led astray, there's no other way to put it, by these so-called fake gurus. So something like that, you might have a tendency, worst case scenario, even ending up in a cult. You might be more susceptible than others to end up in a cult and be seduced by some kind of religious figure that is very negative. Okay, this is pretty much, I've given you some interpretations. Like I said, there's a lot of possibilities depending on what is going on in the individual horoscope. If the first house lord is going into the 10th house and it's not particularly positive, afflicted, negative, and so on, of course, the 10th house is the house of career. It's also the house of the father to some extent, especially the father's social status and profession. It's connected to the government, the ruling powers, authority, your relationship to the authority. And social status, pretty much. I think that pretty much covers everything. So if the Lord of the first house is not particularly positive going into the 10th house, this could be showing, dents in your reputation. Now, depending on where these dents are coming from, whether they're coming from, let's say, bad behaviors that you have picked up early on in life, more specifically from the father figure, because 10th house is the father figure, or they came from things that are beyond your control, like maybe your appearance, maybe all kinds of things. I don't know. There are loads of injustices happening in the world and people suffering prejudicial treatments and all this stuff. Whether it's one case or the other, you would have to look at the individual horoscope to get more details about it. But one way or another, there could be some kind of a dent in your reputation or the way that you are viewed, especially at the workplace, but not only, because the 10th house is about, it's your general reputation. It's how you are known, how you are perceived. So there could be some dents in your reputation. There could be like you're generally not well seen, or there are a lot of stains on your image, so to speak. That could be one thing that happens. Aside from that, of course, relationship with the father may not be great, especially when it comes to, let's say I don't know how to explain this exactly, but the 9th house is more about the father's teachings, and the 10th house is more about the father's social status and profession, right? So what the father taught you through his profession, or by you following him at work or watching him work or learning about his profession. So somehow something about the father's profession may have had a negative impact on you, negative impact on your development, maybe even physically, or affected your sense of confidence, especially with the first house. Like, to give you an example, I don't know, let's say you had a father who traveled a lot, right? And because of his traveling, you had to move around. The whole family was uprooted, and you never really developed a strong sense of self. That's another thing, by the way. The father's reputation could have a negative impact on you. So, like these people who are raised by infamous parents, and it's like the image of the father can never escape them. Unless they, I don't know, move to a foreign country and change their name. And of course, the 10th house also has to deal with authority figures, government, the state. So you might, again, obviously it's not like everyone who has this is going to get into problems with the law, but you might be more prone than average. So again, it's something to bear in mind that it's, you shouldn't be taking any unnecessary risks. Like, don't cheat on your taxes with this placement is all I'm going to say. But a lot depends on individual. I always say this, I know, but really a lot depends on individual placements, because different planets can show different kinds of problems. Of course, there is also employment with the 10th house. Employment, your bosses at work. So there could be difficult relationships with the superiors at work, conflicts. There could be frustrations also when it comes to establishing yourself in a particular career, or feeling like you're not really appreciated at your true value, or like you have to try really hard, way harder than other people to get the same kind of appreciation. This is what I can say about first house lord going into the 10th. If the first house lord is going into the 11th. So the 11th has to deal with gains, especially gains from career. It's one of the money houses. It's one of the most important, if not the most important money house. But it's especially connected to the money that you make from your career. That's why it's the second to the 10th house. Aside from that, it's also about your social network. It's about acquaintances and friends and elder siblings. And it's also about humanitarian causes, your attitude towards humanitarian causes or towards society at large. It's about large groups of people and how you relate to large groups of people or large organizations. So having a first house lord going into the 11th house, even though it's generally a positive thing, if there's a lot of affliction on the first house lord, this could, have some negative outcomes. So one negative outcome could have to do with the relationship with the sibling. So there could be arguments, there could be a negative impact from the sibling onto your life. For instance, the sibling could be not a great influence on your life. Aside from that, with friends, same thing. You might have, and I always issue this, I think with every house, I have issued the disclaimer that so much depends on what is going on in the individual chart, because there could be additional markers, additional planets involved in this configuration that will point one direction or another. So one thing that could happen is you could have friends who act against you, or they become frenemies, and I would especially expect to see this if you have a lot of, let's say, 8th house, a lot of 6th house involved with the 11th, especially also, and or if you have Rahu aspecting the 11th, or the 11th lord as well, or the first lord, which also implies that it's aspecting the 11th house. So that could happen, but that's one scenario of many. So there might be some kind of troubles with friends, though. There might be some kind of, like, the relationship to friends, the relationship to older siblings could impact you negatively, could impact your sense of confidence negatively, and your ability to assert yourself. That's another thing. So another example could be you could have a older sibling who is, let's say, abusive in one way or another when you're growing up, and because of that, they stifle your confidence, your ability to stand out for yourself, to stand out in a crowd, and to be assertive and go after what you want, basically. That could be one example of many. Another thing is you could have bad experiences when it comes to crowds. This is similar to the 7th house placement, in the sense that, let's say, because you had some kind of bad experience when you had to do a play in grade school, now you have an anxiety about talking in front of a crowd, and even though you have to right now work in a corporation and you're expected to give a presentation, you are terrified to talk about anything in front of a large group of people. That's one example I can think about. Another thing that could happen is when you're working in large corporations, because the 11th house again shows large groups of people, large masses of people. There could be, well, in general, there could be bad experiences involving large groups of people. So bear that in mind when you participate in the next protest. One example of many, again, something could go wrong. And again, because the first house is the house of the appearance and the physical body, I was going to say there might be some physical impact, literally, like you getting hurt or something, or your health being affected. Like, for instance, like many people working in narcissistic corporate environments, they get sick over time because of the toxic work culture and work environment, right? So that could be an example. But a lot would have to be seen, again, from the individual placement. So if I would see, let's say, some kind of a Mars situation here, a lot of strong Mars energy, or a lot of 8th house energy here with the 11th house, like the Mars sitting in the 11th house, or the 8th house lord sitting in the 11th house, or conjunct the lord of the 11th house, in addition to the first house lord being in there as well, I would draw conclusions connected to potential violence, like accidents, violence, something like that. Same thing with Rahu. There might be sudden events, like sudden unexplained events, although Rahu can be a lot of things, can be going to a college student party and getting roofied, because Rahu is about poisons and spirits and stuff like that. Yeah. Okay, so moving on. This is pretty much what I can say about the 11th house. I think I've covered everything I could think about when it comes to the 11th house. Moving on to, last but not least, the 12th house, right? So the 12th house, which is connected to faraway lands, export, import, foreigners, foreign cultures, places of confinement. So that means hospitals, places of worship like temple, church, synagogue, mosque, anything, whatever you call it, ashram. Um, Another thing with the 11th house, places, so like I said, isolation in general can be prisons, can be hospitals, can be mental asylums, you know. And it also connects to the subconscious. It connects to hidden affairs. That's another big one. So if the first house lord is not particularly, sorry, healthy, it's afflicted, it's debilitated, and it's falling into the 12th house, you could see this as, well, a bunch of things depending on what is going on in the individual horoscope. But just to give you an example, could be a scandal involving a illicit affair that affects your reputation, your image in the world. Could be a trip abroad that makes you sick one way or another, depending on what else is going on there, right? So if you have, like, let's say Saturn involved, like you have the Lord of the first house conjunct Saturn falling into the 12th house, I would definitely worry. Well, not worry necessarily, but I would be cautious. That's the best way to put it. I would be cautious about health issues developing, especially when traveling abroad, or especially connected to spending time in isolation, for instance. So the 12th house also has to deal with dreams, the dream world, the subconscious, even the collective subconscious. So it could be restless sleeping. Again, depending a lot on what else is going on there. But it could be restless sleeping, bad sleep patterns that are affecting your health, because first house is the house of the physical body, the health. 12th house can also be bad connections to foreigners, you know, some bad experiences connected to foreigners, and like I said, traveling abroad. And also religious figures, you know, because like I said, it's connected to places of worship, places of isolation, depending on what else is going on there. Like, for instance, let me just throw something out there that I think could happen. I have to say I haven't seen it, but intuitively, I would say if someone has, let's say, the 3rd, the 8th house together with the 1st house, sitting in the 12th house, this could be someone who has claustrophobia, you know, like very intense claustrophobia, because 12th house is confinement, and then 8th house is phobias. 3rd house is thought patterns, you know, so your mind going haywire, spinning in circles in all kinds of negative thought patterns. So yeah, there are many possibilities here, but another thing with the 12th house is that it is the house of loss. So again, if you have the first house lord with the 12th house in the 12th house, there could be like a problem with the sense of identity. There could be a loss of a sense of self. Maybe even, again, worst case scenario, some kind of mental illness connected to this. Like there's this condition called depersonalization. Again, I have not analyzed horoscopes of people who have this, but I wouldn't be surprised if they had some connection between the 1st and the 12th houses. Because the 12th house is about detachment. It's about, you know, breaking away from the worldly things to a large extent. And I wouldn't be surprised, yeah, if this could show up. This would show up. And then the 12th house is also feet. So since the 1st house is the physical body, 12th house is feet. If you have a negative connection here, connotation, there could be health issues connected to the feet. There could also be problems, but this is more specific. You could come across hurdles and problems when it comes to import-export stuff. But even as a customer, as a buyer, let's say you buy something from faraway places, you might come across more hurdles and more inconveniences than the average person. And this is a bit woo-woo, but this is one of those placements where I would advise people to really not mess with Wicca or anything paranormal, because it might make you more sensitive than the average person. And in fact, sensitivity could be, again, a big factor with this placement. You could be too receptive to the world around you and the unseen world, so to speak. And that could really mess up with your health and your sense of identity and, yeah, make it difficult for you to function in the world. Okay, this is pretty much what I can say about the first house lord going through houses and potentially negative impacts. I know it's not exactly the most cheerful subject, but I did say that I was going to continue it, so I felt like continuing it today. And yeah, thank you for listening, and of course, feel free to comment in the comment section as usual with, your personal experiences or experiences of people that that match what I was talking about. So anything that crosses your mind, really, as long as it's respectful and mostly on topic. Aside from that, if you have not subscribed to my channel, please do so. It will only take a second, and it is free, and it's the easiest way to support me. And consider clicking on the notifications bell if you want to see when I post a new video on this channel. If you are interested in finding out more about the membership section on my channel, check out the introductory part of this video. I will leave timestamps actually in the video description, so you can find a lot more information in there. And yeah, you can check out, if you're interested in the membership section. Aside from the membership section, if you're interested in a private astrology reading, of course, I do readings on a wide variety of topics. I have left my email address in the video description, so you can email me for a pricing list and waiting time for reading and all kinds of other details. So all the information you're interested in, we can discuss it by email. Aside from that, if you are interested in tarot, last but not least, I also have a tarot channel, which I have started more recently than this one. And I will be linking the link to my tarot channel in the video description as well. So if you're curious about it, go ahead and check it out. Maybe subscribe to my tarot channel. I would greatly appreciate it. Thank you very much for listening, and I hope to see you in my next video. Bye!